He sang a note, and the world changed. But why? What was it about the sound of Elvis Presley that stopped people in their tracks in 1954 and still does today? It wasn't just the songs. It wasn't just the looks. It was the sound. A sound so unique that record producers at first didn't know what to do with it. Was he a country singer? A blues singer? Was he black? Was he white? The sound was a puzzle. Scientists, musicologists, and audio engineers have spent decades trying to take that puzzle apart. They have analyzed his vocal cords, the frequencies of his voice, the echo in his recordings, and the very air in the studios where he sang. They have put his sound under a microscope. What they found is not one single thing, but a complex combination of biology, technology, culture, and pure, raw talent. It's a mix of physics and feeling. Here are 17 investigations that try to explain the sound that shook the world. Number 17, was it just one voice or many? The first thing any analysis of Elvis's sound runs into is a fundamental problem. There is no single Elvis voice. A 2014 study in the Journal of Voice, focusing on the acoustic analysis of singers, highlights a concept called vocal versatility. While not about Elvis specifically, it gives us a framework. Most singers have a distinct vocal identity. You hear a few notes, you know who it is. Elvis is different. The voice that sang Blue Moon of Kentucky in 1954 is a different instrument from the one that sang Suspicious Minds in 1969. And that voice is different again from the one that sang Unchained Melody in 1977. Musicologist Henry Pleasance, in his book The Great American Popular Singers, was one of the first to treat Elvis with serious critical analysis. He argued that Elvis was not one singer but three. He identified a high, pure tenor, perfect for ballads like Are You Lonesome Tonight? He also identified a higher, raw rock and roll voice, full of energy and abandon, used in jailhouse rock. And then there was the low, rich baritone, the voice for blues and gospel songs like Mean Woman Blues. Pleasance claimed Elvis could move between these voices at will, sometimes in the same song. Take Suspicious Minds. He starts with a controlled, mid-range delivery. By the chorus, he's pushing into a higher, more urgent register. In the final, frantic instrumental break, he's using ad-libs in a deep, percussive baritone. This wasn't just singing a melody, it was using different vocal textures like a painter uses different colors. He wasn't just a baritone who could sing high. He was, according to this analysis, a singer with multiple distinct vocal placements. The sound was unique because it was never just one sound. It was an arsenal of voices in one throat. But is this analysis complete? Did he consciously switch between these voices, or was it an intuitive response to the music? Could the physical changes in his body over the years have permanently altered the core instrument, making some voices more accessible than others at different times in his life? And if we could map his vocal output over his entire career, would we find even more than three distinct voices? Number 16, did a room in Memphis create a sound? A sound is not just made by a voice, it is shaped by the space around it. The sound of early Elvis is inseparable from a small, oddly shaped room at 706 Union Avenue in Memphis. This was Sun Studio. Sam Phillips, the founder of Sun Records, wasn't just a record producer. He was an audio experimentalist. He understood something fundamental. The room itself is an instrument. Audio engineering studies, like those published in magazines like Sound on Sound, have broken down the acoustic properties of famous studios. Sun Studio was not a professionally designed acoustic space. It was a former radiator shop with asbestos ceiling tiles and a V-shaped ceiling. This, according to analysis by audio historians like Peter Guralnick, was a happy accident. The irregular surfaces diffused the sound waves instead of creating harsh, flat echoes. This gave recordings a natural warmth and presence. There was no deadness to the sound. It felt alive. Phillips enhanced this with technology. He discovered what would become his signature sound slapback echo. As detailed in Ernst Jorgensen's book, Elvis Presley, A Life in Music, Phillips used two Ampex 350 tape recorders. He would record Elvis's voice on one machine. The tape would then run from that machine to a second machine a short distance away. The second machine would play back what was just recorded a fraction of a second later. And Phillips would then blend this delayed signal back in with the original live vocal. The delay was incredibly short, typically between 75 and 150 milliseconds. It was too short to be heard as a distinct echo. Instead, it was perceived as a thickening of the sound, a kind of halo or aura around the voice. It gave the music a rhythmic bounce and a sense of vast open space, even though it was recorded in a tiny room. This sound became the defining characteristic of rockabilly. It made a single voice and a three-piece band sound huge, urgent, and otherworldly. So, was the Sun sound a product of genius or a fluke of architecture? If Elvis had walked into a different studio that day, would rock and roll have sounded completely different? And how much of what we think of as Elvis's raw talent was actually the careful, secret audio processing of Sam Phillips? Number 15, what was that hiccup in his voice? One of the most distinctive features of Elvis's early recordings is a kind of vocal stutter or hiccup. You can hear it clearly in songs like Good Rockin' Tonight or Baby, Let's Play House. It's a small thing, a brief catch in the throat, but it adds a huge amount of tension and excitement. It sounds like a voice on the edge of breaking, unable to contain its own energy. Linguistic and phonetic studies of vocal styles often look at what are called vocal mannerisms. These are the unique tics and tricks a singer uses that aren't part of the written melody. The Elvis hiccup is a prime example. Analysis by vocal coaches and musicologists suggests it's a form of glottal stop. The glottis is the opening between the vocal folds and the larynx. A glottal stop is when you briefly close the glottis, cutting off the airflow in the sound. It's the sound in the middle of the word, oh! Elvis didn't invent this. You can hear similar techniques in the singing of some country and western singers of the time, like Hank Williams, but Elvis weaponized it. He used it for rhythm and for punctuation. It was a percussive effect, like a drummer hitting a snare. It added a syncopation and a swagger to his singing that was completely new. It was a sound of youthful rebellion, a sound that couldn't be controlled. It made his singing feel spontaneous and unpredictable. It was a deliberate stylistic choice, a way to inject a physical, almost convulsive energy directly into the melodic line. But where did he learn this? Was it a conscious imitation of a specific singer or a subconscious tic he developed? Did he use it more when he was nervous or excited, or was it a completely controlled technical device? And why did this particular mannerism fade from his singing in his later career? Number 14, was he singing from his chest or his head? These singers talk about vocal registration. There's the chest voice, the powerful lower register sound that resonates in your chest cavity. And there's the head voice, the higher, lighter sound that seems to resonate in your head and sinuses. Most pop singers operate primarily in one or the other. An analysis of Elvis's vocal technique shows he was a master of what is called a mixed voice. Vocal pedagogy, the science of voice instruction, has studied this extensively. A mixed voice is not a third register, but a carefully controlled blend of chest and head voice. It allows a singer to move smoothly from low notes to high notes without a noticeable break or change in vocal quality. It gives the high notes the power and timbre of the chest voice, and the low notes the resonance of the head voice. This is an incredibly difficult technique to master. Henry Pleasance pointed this out. He noted that Elvis could sing a high G, a note that is at the top of a tenor's range, with the full resonant sound of a baritone. Listen to the end of An American Trilogy. He soars up to a high note and holds it with incredible power and control. That is not a pure head voice or a strained chest voice. It is a perfectly executed mixed voice. This is what allowed him to have both power and range. He could sing with the raw force of a blues shouter and the delicate control of a ballad singer. His contemporaries were often one or the other. Elvis was both at the same time. His sound wasn't just about the notes he could hit, but about the quality and power he could maintain across his entire range. But was this a trained technique or a natural gift? We know he never had formal vocal training. So how did he develop a technique that professional opera singers spend years trying to perfect? Was there something unique about the physical structure of his larynx and vocal folds that made this blending of registers easier for him? Number 13, how did he use the microphone? In the 1950s, the microphone was still a relatively new and unforgiving tool. Most singers stood still, a respectful distance away, and sang into it. Elvis treated the microphone not as a piece of equipment, but as a partner in the performance. He developed a sophisticated microphone technique that was crucial to his sound. Acoustic engineers and record producers study what is known as the proximity effect. With many microphones like the Neumann and RCA models Elvis used, the closer you get to the mic, the more the lower frequencies are boosted. The bass response increases dramatically. This can make a voice sound muddy and distorted if you're not careful. But Elvis learned to play the microphone. You can see it in live footage from the 50s. He would back away from the mic for loud, powerful notes to avoid distortion. Then, for softer, more intimate phrases, he would move in very close. So this did two things. First, it created a dynamic range in his performance. It was a form of self-mixing. He was controlling the volume and intensity of his own voice in real time. Second, by moving in close, he was using the proximity effect to his advantage. It gave his voice a deep, rich, intimate quality. It created the illusion that he was whispering directly into the listener's ear. This was especially effective on his ballads. It's the difference between hearing a singer on a stage and feeling a singer in the room with you. This technique gave his recordings a sense of presence and intimacy that was startling at the time. But did Sam Phillips or an RCA engineer teach him this, or did he figure it out on his own through trial and error? How much of the dynamic power we hear on his records is his singing, and how much is just his expert manipulation of the microphone's physical properties? And could this technique even be replicated with modern digital microphones that often lack the same pronounced proximity effect? Number 12. What was the science of his vibrato? Vibrato is the slight, rapid variation in pitch used by singers to add warmth and expression to a sustained note. It's a key part of what makes a voice sound trained and professional, but not all vibratos are the same. A 2008 study in the Journal of Singing analyzed the acoustic properties of vibrato in different musical genres. They found that the speed and depth of the vibrato wave can vary significantly. Opera singers, for example, tend to have a consistent, slower vibrato. An acoustic analysis of Elvis's voice reveals a highly adaptable and unconventional vibrato. It wasn't always on. On his fast rock and roll numbers, his voice is often straight with no vibrato at all. This adds to the sense of raw, untutored energy. But on his ballads, he would introduce a slow, warm, pulsating vibrato. Listen to the long notes and can't help falling in love. The vibrato is controlled and deliberate. It's not a nervous wobble. It's an expressive tool. What's more, he could change the speed of his vibrato for emotional effect. At the climax of a powerful song, like If I Can Dream, the vibrato becomes faster and more intense, communicating a sense of passion and urgency. He used vibrato like a gear shift. He could have a slow, subtle vibrato for tenderness, a faster one for excitement, and no vibrato at all for raw aggression. This level of control is rare. It meant his voice was never static. Every long note was alive with emotion and intention, and the specific character of that note was determined by the precise application of his vibrato. But was this control conscious? Did he think, I will use a faster vibrato here? Or was it a direct, unthinking channel for his emotions, with his vocal cords responding automatically to the feeling he was trying to convey? And is there a measurable acoustic signature to his vibrato that is different from any other singer's? Number 11, was he a baritone who thought he was a tenor? For decades, there has been a debate among music critics and fans. What was Elvis's true voice type? He is most often classified as a high baritone. His comfortable range, especially in the 1950s, was in the baritone territory. He had a rich, powerful lower and middle register, yet he consistently sang songs in tenor keys. A musicological analysis of his song choices is revealing. He was drawn to material sung by tenors. He idolized Dean Martin, a crooner with a light baritone voice. He also loved the high soaring vocals of gospel tenors and opera singers like Mario Lanza. He was constantly pushing the upper limits of his own voice. This created a tension in his singing that was a key part of his sound. You can hear this tension in a song like Heartbreak Hotel. The song is low and bluesy, perfect for a baritone. But then in the chorus, he leaps up to a high, wailing note. It sounds like a voice at the very edge of its capabilities. It's not the easy, floating high note of a natural tenor. It's a note that is fought for and conquered. This sense of strain, of effort, is incredibly exciting. It's the sound of someone pushing against their own physical limits. If he had been a natural tenor, the songs might have sounded too easy, too smooth. If he had stayed in his comfortable baritone range, they would have lacked that thrilling, high-wire excitement. The uniqueness of his sound came from this mismatch of baritone's power with a tenor's ambition. But did this constant pushing damage his voice over the long term? Was his later vocal decline a direct result of singing in keys that were technically too high for him for 20 years? Or did this constant stretching of his vocal cords actually increase his range over time before other factors led to its deterioration? Number 10. How did gospel quartets rewire his brain for harmony? Elvis's sound wasn't created in a vacuum. He was a sponge, absorbing all the music around him in Memphis. And no music was more important to him than Southern gospel quartet music. This wasn't just an influence, it was his musical education. He spent countless hours listening to groups like the Statesmen and the Blackwood Brothers. Ethnomusicology, the study of music in its cultural context, helps us understand this. Gospel quartet singing is a complex art form. It involves intricate four-part harmonies, call and response patterns, and dramatic shifts in tempo and dynamics. The lead singer is important, but so is the deep bass singer, the high tenor, and the baritone who fills in the middle. Elvis didn't just listen to the lead, he absorbed the entire sonic structure. You can hear this directly in his work with the Jordanaires, his primary backup group from 1956 to the late 1960s. Listen to a song like It's Now or Never. The Jordanaires provide a smooth, classical-sounding chorus. But listen to Elvis. He's not just singing the melody over them. He's weaving his voice in and out of their harmonies. He's singing counter melodies. He's anticipating their chords. He's functioning like a fifth member of the quartet. His brain was wired for harmony. He could hear all the parts at once and knew instinctively where his own voice should fit. This gave his vocals a richness and a complexity that was missing from the work of many of his rock and roll peers, who were often just shouting a melody over a simple band. But how deep did this go? When he was singing alone, was he still hearing those gospel harmonies in his head? And was his vocal line a subconscious reaction to a phantom choir? Could his unique sense of pitch and phrasing be traced directly back to specific melodic patterns used by gospel bass or tenor singers? Number 9. What did he do with the space between the notes? His rhythm is more than just a beat. It's about how you play with that beat. It's about syncopation, about singing ahead of the beat or behind it. It's about the timing of the silence as much as the timing of the notes. A rhythmic analysis of Elvis's vocal style reveals a masterful and intuitive sense of time. Music theorists call this microtiming. It refers to the small expressive deviations from a strict metronomic rhythm. Though computers can play notes perfectly on the beat, humans rarely do, and great singers manipulate this timing for emotional effect. Elvis was a master of singing behind the beat. On a slow blues number like Reconsider Baby, he lets the band establish a steady rhythm. Then his vocal comes in just a fraction of a second late. It gives the singing a lazy, relaxed, and incredibly cool feel. It sounds effortless, but it's a highly sophisticated rhythmic choice. On the other hand, on an up-tempo song, he would often sing on top of the beat, pushing the rhythm forward and creating a sense of urgency and excitement. He could switch between these feels within a single song. This rhythmic flexibility likely came from his immersion in blues and R&B music, where this kind of fluid phrasing is common. He didn't just sing melodies, he danced around them. He treated the rhythm not as a cage, but as a playground. This is why his singing swings. It's why it makes you want to move. The sound had a physical, propulsive quality that came directly from his uncanny sense of timing. But was this a learned skill, or was he born with a unique internal clock? Could his physical dancing and his vocal phrasing be seen as two expressions of the same internal rhythmic sense? And if we were to analyze his microtiming with modern software, would we find a consistent pattern, a rhythmic fingerprint that is uniquely his? Number 8. Why did he blend black and white sounds? The most controversial and revolutionary aspect of Elvis's sound in the 1950s was its racial ambiguity. In a deeply segregated America, his voice crossed the color line. He was a white singer from Mississippi who sounded, to many listeners, black. This was the central mystery that Sam Phillips was looking for. If I could find a white man who had the Negro sound and the Negro feel, I could make $1 billion. Sociological and cultural studies of music have examined this phenomenon at length. And Elvis grew up in Tupelo, Mississippi, and later in Memphis, in neighborhoods where he was exposed to both white country music from the Grand Ole Opry and black blues and R&B from Beale Street. He didn't see them as separate categories, he just heard music that he loved. His sound was not a calculated imitation. It was a natural synthesis of these influences. In a song like That's Alright, you can hear this fusion perfectly. The song was written and originally performed by a black bluesman, Arthur Big Boy Crudup. The Crudup's version is a classic, slow, burning blues. Elvis's version is completely different. He speeds it up, pushes the rhythm, and sings it with a kind of breathless, country-inflected excitement. He keeps the bluesy phrasing and the emotional grit of the original, but he puts it on top of a nervous, jumpy country rhythm. It was neither black nor white, it was something new. This blending of vocal styles, rhythms, and attitudes was the foundational act of rock and roll. It was a sound that scared some people and thrilled others, precisely because it ignored the rigid cultural boundaries of its time. But how conscious was he of this synthesis? Did he think of himself as blending genres, or was he just singing the song in the only way he knew how? Was the Negro sound that Sam Phillips heard a matter of vocal timbre, pronunciation, rhythm, or something else entirely? And could a sound like that have been created at any other time or in any other place? Number 7. How did he change the way words are sung? Elvis didn't just sing notes, he sang words in a way that was completely new for a white pop singer. His pronunciation, his diction, his accent, all were integral parts of his sound. A phonetic analysis of his singing reveals a unique dialect, one that was both Southern and something else entirely. Linguists who have studied regional American dialects note that Elvis's speech patterns were a mix of Mississippi and Memphis influences. But his singing voice was a further stylization. He dropped his keys rockin', flattened his vowels, and slurred his words in a way that was heavily influenced by the blues singers he admired. In a song like Hound Dog, he doesn't sing the words with the crisp, clear enunciation of a Pat Boone. He bites into them, stretches them, and sometimes swallows them. The words become sounds, textures, percussive events. He also had a unique way of coloring his vowels. Listen to the way he sings the word blue in Blue Suede Shoes. It's not a single pure vowel sound. It's a complex sound that slides and dips, full of emotion and attitude. This was not the polite, correct singing that dominated the pop charts. It was a more direct, physical, and expressive way of using language. It was a way of singing that valued feeling over formal correctness. This made his sound feel more authentic, more dangerous, and more real to a generation of young listeners. But was his singing accent a natural reflection of his speaking voice, or was it a put-on style he adopted for his music? How much did it change when he sang a country song versus a blues song? And if you transcribed his singing phonetically, would it look more like the dialect of a white Southerner or a black Southerner from the same period? Number 6. Could we measure the emotion in his voice? Some of Elvis's most enduring performances are his ballads. Songs like Love Me Tender or Are You Lonesome Tonight have an emotional intensity that is almost painful. It feels like he is laying his soul bare, but can this be measured? The field of psychoacoustic studies how humans perceive sound, including the emotional content of a voice. Some researchers in this field analyze acoustic cues like pitch, volume, timbre, and speech rate. For example, sadness is often associated with a lower average pitch, a slower rate of speech, and a darker vocal timbre with less high-frequency energy. Excitement is associated with a higher pitch, faster speed, and more high-frequency energy. An analysis of Elvis's ballads shows a mastery of these cues. In Are You Lonesome Tonight, the verses are delivered in a low, slow, almost spoken word style. His voice is soft, the timbre is dark, it's the acoustic signature of sadness and intimacy. But at the emotional peak of the song, his pitch rises, his volume increases, and his voice takes on a more strained, urgent quality, the sound of desperation. He wasn't just singing sad words, he was producing the acoustic signals of sadness itself. This is what connects with listeners on a primal, subconscious level. It bypasses the analytical part of the brain and hits you directly in the heart. His instrument was not just his vocal cords, but the entire human emotional spectrum. But was this intuitive, or did he learn by listening to other actors and singers how to manipulate these emotional cues? Could you take the emotional power away from his voice by digitally altering these acoustic parameters like pitch and speed? And is there a unique emotional fingerprint in his voice's frequency spectrum that is consistent across all his sad songs. Number 5, how did his physical health change his instrument? The human voice is not a static thing. It is a biological instrument, and it changes as the body changes. The story of Elvis's voice from the 1950s to the 1970s is a story of dramatic physical transformation, and his sound changed right along with it. A physiological analysis would connect these changes directly. In the 1950s, he was lean and wiry. His voice was light, agile, and full of nervous energy. In the late 1960s, after years of physical training for his 1968 comeback special, he was in peak physical condition. His breath control was immense. His voice was powerful, controlled, and at the height of its powers. This was the voice of suspicious minds and in the ghetto. By the mid-1970s, his health had declined significantly due to weight gain and prescription drug abuse. This had a direct and audible effect on his voice. A 2016 study in the journal Voice on the effects of obesity on vocal production found that it can lead to reduced lung capacity, affecting breath support, and can also alter the resonant properties of the vocal tract. You can hear this in Elvis's later recordings. His breath control on long phrases was diminished. His voice sometimes sounded heavy and labored. The light, agile quality was gone. However, the change was not entirely negative. His voice also became deeper and richer. The lower baritone register became incredibly powerful and resonant. His 1976 recording of Hurt is a showcase for this later voice. It's a titanic performance, full of pain and power. The high notes are a struggle, but the low notes have a gravity and weight that his younger voice never possessed. The sound had changed from a whip to a sledgehammer, but could some of the positive changes, like the deepened timbre, have been a direct result of the same physical processes that caused the negative changes? Was the loss of his high register an unavoidable trade-off for the newfound power in his low register? And if he had maintained his physical health, what would the voice of a 60-year-old Elvis have sounded like? Number 4, did he transform songs or just cover them? Elvis Presley wrote very few of his own songs. The vast majority of his hits were written by others. This has led some critics to dismiss him as a mere interpreter. But a comparative musicological analysis of his recordings versus the original versions reveals something extraordinary. He wasn't just covering songs, he was fundamentally reinventing them. Take Hound Dog. The original by Big Mama Thornton is a slow, powerful 12-bar blues. It's a woman's song full of weary anger. Elvis heard a Las Vegas lounge act perform a comedic, up-tempo version and decided to record it. But his version is neither a straight blues nor a joke. He turns it into an explosion of pure rock and roll energy. He changes the rhythm, the phrasing, and the entire emotional attitude of the song. It becomes a snarl of youthful defiance. The song is unrecognizable. Or consider Blue Suede Shoes, written and first recorded by his Sun Records label mate Carl Perkins. Perkins' version is classic rockabilly, lean, tight, and clever. Elvis's version, recorded just a few months later for RCA, is a sonic assault. It's faster, louder, and more chaotic. He sings it with a sense of gleeful abandon that pushes the song to a whole new level of intensity. He took a great song and made it an anthem. He acted as a kind of alchemist, taking raw musical material and transforming it into something new and powerful. His true genius was not in writing, but in arrangement and performance. His voice was the catalyst that caused the chemical reaction. But was this process of transformation a conscious, analytical one, or a purely intuitive act? How many of the changes were his ideas versus those of the musicians in the studio? And are there any examples of songs he recorded where the original version is arguably better, and if so, what does that tell us about the limits of his transformative power? Number 3, was the Jordanaire sound a secret weapon? Beginning in 1956, most of Elvis's recordings featured the smooth, polished harmonies of a gospel quartet called the Jordanaires. Their contribution to the Elvis sound is immense, yet often overlooked. An acoustic analysis shows how their voices created a perfect frame for his. The Jordanaires, led by Gordon Stoker, provided a sound that was rich, precise, and almost classical in its purity. This created a fascinating contrast with Elvis's own raw, blues-inflected, and rhythmically complex lead vocal. It was the sound of the church choir meeting the sound of the juke joint, This contrast was a key part of the sonic formula. It made the record sound simultaneously respectable and dangerous. Listen to a song like Don't Be Cruel. Elvis's vocal is full of hiccups, slurs, and rhythmic swagger. Behind him, the Jordanaires are singing smooth, perfectly blended oohs and ahs. Their sound adds a layer of sonic polish and sophistication. It fills up the frequency spectrum, making the record sound fuller and more expensive than his early Sun recordings. It was a sound designed for pop radio. In a way, the Jordanaires whitened his sound just enough to make it palatable to a mainstream audience, without erasing the black influences that made it so exciting in the first place. They were the bridge that allowed his revolutionary sound to cross over into the pop mainstream. But how much did their presence constrain him? Would his sound have evolved in a more raw, bluesy direction without their smoothing influence? Was their sound the key to his commercial success, but also a barrier to his artistic exploration? And what would his 70s music have sounded like if he had continued to use their precise harmonies instead of the more operatic sound of his later backup groups? Number 2, what was the unseen influence of Bill Kenny? When we think of Elvis's influences, we think of bluesmen and country singers. But one of his biggest vocal heroes was a singer. Most people today have never heard of Bill Kenny, the high tenor for an incredibly popular black vocal group called the Ink Spots. A deep dive into Elvis's record collection and early interviews, like the research done by biographer Peter Guralnick, confirms this obsession. The Ink Spots had a very specific formula. Kenny would sing the main melody in a high, clear, and almost painfully sincere tenor voice with perfect diction. Then, in the middle of the song, the bass singer, Hoppy Jones, would deliver a spoken word monologue. This contrast between the high, emotional singing and the low, intimate talking was their trademark. Now listen to Are You Lonesome Tonight? It's the Ink Spots formula perfected. Elvis sings the main song in a high, clear, vulnerable voice, a direct echo of Bill Kenny's style. Then, in the middle, he drops into a spoken word monologue. The influence is not just present, it is the entire structure of the performance. Even the timbre of his high ballad voice, that pure, almost choir voice sound, is a clear homage to Kenny. This was the secret source for his ballad voice. It didn't come from country music or the blues. It came from one of the most popular black pop groups of the 1940s. It's another example of how his sound was built on a complex, cross-cultural foundation that most of his audience was completely unaware of. But why was this particular influence so rarely discussed at the time? Was it because acknowledging the influence of a black pop group was commercially risky? How many other secret influences are still buried in his vocal style, waiting to be identified? And if Bill Kenny was the blueprint for his ballad voice, who was the blueprint for his rock and roll voice? Number 1, was there something physically unique about his larynx? After all the analysis of technique, influence, and technology, we are left with one final, tantalizing question. Was there something physically, biologically unique about Elvis Presley's vocal instrument? We can analyze what he did with his voice, but we cannot now analyze the voice itself. However, we can speculate based on the evidence of the recordings. Otolaryngology, the medical specialty that deals with the larynx, provides a framework. The sound of a voice is determined by the length and thickness of the vocal folds, the size and shape of the larynx, and the configuration of the resonant cavities in the throat, mouth, and nose. The evidence for Elvis's voice suggests a rare combination of attributes. His ability to sing with the power of a baritone points to thick, robust vocal folds. His ability to reach high tenor notes suggests his vocal folds were also capable of stretching to a great length and vibrating at high speeds. His ability to produce a rich, resonant tone across that range suggests he had large, well-configured resonant cavities. It's possible he had the vocal fold structure of a dramatic baritone combined with the laryngeal agility of a lyric tenor. This combination would be extremely rare. We know from his autopsy report, detailed in the 2010 book The King and Dr. Nick by George Nicopolis' son, that he suffered from a number of underlying health issues. It is not a stretch to wonder if his body contained other, more positive anatomical anomalies. His vocal apparatus might have been one of them. He may have been, in a very real sense, a genetic outlier, born with a vocal instrument that was simply different from, and perhaps superior to almost anyone else's. The sound was unique because the throat that produced it was unique, but without a physical examination, this remains pure speculation. Could future technology, perhaps analyzing his DNA, tell us anything about the likely structure of his vocal cords? Is it possible to create a complete computer model of his vocal tract based on the acoustic evidence of his thousands of recordings? And ultimately, even if we could map every cell of his larynx and every nuance of his technique, would we ever truly solve the mystery of why his voice, and not someone else's, was the one that changed the world?